Hey folks, this is Rob Eiler working with Chabon Concepts, and thanks to Kaiser Marston for sponsoring this Ask an Economist economic update with me. I want to thank Chabon also for sponsoring this and sort of driving the ship here. So if you have come to previous episodes of this Ask an Economist webinar, I started a few weeks ago talking about the caseload and sort of, moving through the labor data that might be coming. We now have new data at the national level. And so most of today, what I'm going to talk about is not only kind of where we are from a job standpoint, but really more digging deep into what we've seen in new data with respect to gross domestic product in the first quarter, which will, in a sense, inform a lot of forecasts going forward for most of the states individually, specifically California. So this is the agenda today. We're going to talk about what the data revealing has shown and still watching sort of the connection to jobs. But you're going to hear me talk today less about new initial claims for unemployment insurance and talk more about continued claims, because that will now become the focus if we believe that new initial claims for unemployment insurance is going to start to peak. We also talk about reopening. We're hearing a lot of this politically and socially about where we go next in terms of reopening. And what does that mean in terms of potential industries going forward? And I'm going to focus today on construction in terms of economic development, because construction is a place where in previous recovery periods, we've seen booming economies come out of more construction, which drives a lot of other activity and also provides more capacity for the macroeconomy. And at the end, I'll talk about where we need to watch very closely from an economic development standpoint in terms of how job losses can become business losses. And it's in those business losses that we lose capacity in the economy. So if we can preserve the number of businesses in our local economies, that's going to preserve a lot of where we were previous to COVID-19 and what will help get our forecast moving from, let's say, more ugly forecasts toward more good ones. So just as a reminder, this situation is a tale of three policies. Positively, we've seen interest rates drop. We've seen the Federal Reserve become very aggressive about new programs and providing banks and residents and businesses all with potential deals on getting back together through credit markets. Fiscal policy, we've seen an enormous amount of spending discussed, passed, and starting to hit the street. I'm going to show you the data that in the first quarter, a lot of that money did not hit the street, but in the second and third quarter, we'll probably see a lot of it hit. But they're all meant to offset the negative of social policy. So our social constraints, our sheltering in place, what we may have to do as businesses on the other side of this, all are negatives in terms of what the economy would have faced but for the COVID-19 situation. So the hope is at the end, these two positive policies end up bigger than the negative from the social policy, both now and whatever lingers. Just as a reminder, we've seen some unprecedented movements in the initial claims from unemployment. You can see that the black line here, which is the quarterly average for US, is actually shot off the graph. And I'm showing this for effect, that the vertical climb has been so steep over the last few weeks that the quarterly average for the first and second quarters went just absolutely through the roof. And that's also true for California, though not as quick in terms of the graph I have here, but still very much a vertical climb, which suggests, given the last few recessions that show on this graph, the data here are from 1986 forward, that we are in unprecedented territory as to the speed at which people are losing their jobs and asking for unemployment insurance. And that usually begets relatively quick ascension of unemployment rates. So when the jobs data come out next Friday for California specifically, but for most of the US states and counties, we're going to see some unbelievable numbers. And in fact, by the end of this week, we're going to hear the US data nationally, and it's going to be relatively ugly for April. Okay, now, as I said earlier, we're going to be watching these data next. So new initial claims for unemployment insurance might peak early and then start to fade. And then the key is how many people remain on unemployment insurance. And in economics, we call that continued claims for unemployment insurance, meaning that you didn't go on for 4 weeks and then drop off. You may have gone on and you might stay for some time. So you can see, again, these are the same data from 1986 forward in terms of the time. The unemployment rate is weaving through these data, which is the blue for California, and the California continued claims are the black as an example. You can see the duration of unemployment in the Gulf War I recession, the dot-com recession, and then the Great Recession. The long climb uphill of the black line suggests how long people were on unemployment and how many people were receiving it, and then how long it took to get unemployment to actually turn. So continued claims are, in a sense, the number of weeks that people remain on unemployment in aggregate, and the longer that that black line spreads at the top, the longer usually the duration of unemployment. So you can see that in the Great Recession, we actually went up the hill over a long period of time, peaked and then fell relatively quickly. And that in a sense made the peak of unemployment a little bit less over time, but very high. So given what we've seen with new claims for unemployment insurance, we're expecting continued claims to climb very quickly and probably stay there for at least 1 or 2 quarters, which hopefully means that if it does start to fall after a couple of quarters, rather than fall after, let's say, 2 or 3 years of a climb, the duration of unemployment after it hits its peak should be relatively quick thereafter. We will see. It all depends on rehiring. So some new data that hit since the last update and are now, in some cases, the focus of Economist effort, because a lot of the original forecasts about the economy going through 2020 and 2021 were based on these data now coming to light. So this is US GDP on a quarterly basis in what's called seasonally adjusted annual rates, which means basically you take the difference between last quarter's GDP and this quarter's GDP, that percentage change is divided by 4, or multiplied by 4, and that gives you the assumed annual rate on a seasonally adjusted basis. The point is that if you look at it historically, you can see here are the 3 recessions since 1990. In the Great Recession, hopefully my arrow will show, you can see here at the bottom, it was negative 8.2 in the worst quarter, which is the 4th quarter of 2008. Then what we saw last quarter for 2020, the first quarter of 2020, the first estimate is negative 4.8. So the ugliness we expected in terms of the productivity of our economy, which GDP is basically a statement of, is starting to come to light. Now, what that will do is it will shape further forecasting going forward and also inform policymakers about the effects of policies that have been passed as we see subsequent quarters come to light. So let's now talk more deeply, though, about what's causing this. So one of the biggest concerns for us is how policy can attack certain portions of the economy to help that corner get turned once we reopen the economy. Here's consumption. So consumption is generally 70% of our economy. So a lot of the reasons why we saw the downturn of GDP in the first quarter estimated is that we saw consumption fall, which means that people stopped spending as much money as they normally do. They didn't stop spending money generally. What they did, though, is they shifted their consumption pattern and lowered it. And that's why that blue column on the far right-hand side, the first quarter of 2020 in its first estimate, saw it falling relatively quickly. Here's business investment. So business investment usually, and I'm going to take you back and I'm going to shade these areas in a minute, but hopefully my cursor will show up. This middle portion here, which is the Great Recession, you can see that while consumption did fall initially, it was investment falling that really hurt us, because consumption, which is generally true, tends to rebound relatively quickly. Consumers are relatively fickle and they tend to come back quickly. So you can see in the Great Recession, we had a couple of nasty quarters, and then we entered 2009 where we had interest rates fall, like we have this time, which gave consumers and businesses a reason to spend more, but business decisions usually lag a little bit because they're concerned about risk in the economy more than consumers are. So you can see investment lagged a little bit, the changes in consumption, and then once consumers bounced back, investment tended to bounce back and come back pretty fast, even though it had some wobbles coming out of the Great Recession, the growth began to compound. So we will see how this works, but notice they're both negative right off the top, similar to the beginning of the Great Recession. Now, here's government spending. So we've heard a lot about fiscal policy, and this is where fiscal policy is going to start to show its face. You may not have noticed that because it's relatively small, but I'm going to show it to you again. If you look at the far right-hand side, you can see this little nub come up above the blue and the orange here on this side. That is just the beginning of fiscal policy starting to provide some help for the economy. We will see how much that adds to GDP going forward against the detriment from consumption and investment. But the other two parts of GDP are exports, which we sold fewer products to the world, so that ended up as a drag on our economy on top of consumption. But because of our consumption pattern, and this is kind of one of the weird things about using GDP as a statistic for something like this, that when we consume less, we also consume fewer imports, generally speaking, and that's exactly what happened. So imports, the reduction in imports, which was smaller than the reduction of exports, but nevertheless, it was a reduction, actually helped boost gross domestic product. We tended to move our consumption pattern to local goods rather than global goods. And part of that's because the global supply chain had seized up and our ability to gain access to global goods has been lessened because of COVID-19 being a global phenomenon. But anyway, that's the way to look at each piece of GDP in terms of how it contributed to what's been going on and also historically. And you can see how other recessions, as I'll now shade, and this is GDP in total, have played themselves out in terms of these components. And that's where we are today. Okay, so let's break down consumption briefly in just a couple of ways, because consumption has two subcomponents. One is goods consumption, or how we buy goods, both durable and non-durable, meaning, you know, like household appliances versus grocery store and, you know, food at the grocery store. Here is the 1990 forward, same span of data as the last two graphs. Whoop. And you can see where the recessions are, and you can see a very small change in goods consumption. Why? Because we didn't stop buying goods. What we did is we shifted the types of goods. So we went from durable to non-durable appliances to goods at home, but we still contracted how much we're buying overall. So the overall goods consumption just kind of moved down a little bit. But where we really got hammered, and this is critical, was in services. So why consumption fell so far was not necessarily because we stopped buying goods, it's because we stopped using services. And this includes restaurant services, professional services, and all kinds of other services that we tend to consume. And that's where the hammer really fell. So we will see as we turn the corner out of this situation, where we go from here in terms of services consumption. But here are the three recessions, and you can see in the Great Recession right here, the maximum, shouldn't say it that way, the most negative number we saw in terms of services contraction and consumption was 2.2% from the previous quarter on a seasonally adjusted average rate basis or annual rate basis. And you can see here that we had negative 10.2 in the first estimate for quarter one. So a lot of nastiness on the services side, which we kind of already knew, but these data reveal that where most of the action is and why GDP fell was because of services consumption. Totally expected. The number is somewhat shocking, historically speaking. Okay, so just as a reminder, I've said this almost every time we've done this webinar, it's depth and duration. What policy is attempting to do is lower or keep the depth from being too low and the duration from being too long. And that's classic reaction to potential recession. So what we now want to do is we want to look and see where do we think the economy is going. And you're going to see some forecasts now from the National Association of Business Economists, which generally speaking is a pretty good forecast in terms of looking at the past and how they performed. Here are some of the forecasts, and I want to show you some of the nastiness in the numbers that are out there. This is the GDP forecast going forward. So the data I just showed you were not known when this forecast first hit the street, and you can see that in the middle, the median forecast only thought it was going to go down by 2.4. So it actually was double that number, which might give you some pause and say, whoa, if it was double that number, what's quarter two going to look like? Well, it just so happens that that is the middle of the forecast. The worst forecast of the 5 lowest forecasters actually had it way more down. So it's possible that we're going to end up somewhere in the middle, maybe in the negative 35-ish range, maybe closer to 40, we'll see. But there were some optimists out there also, which were way off from quarter one. But the conditions of the economy going into this give some credence to maybe a little bit more optimistic forecast once the economy opens up. And that's the critical factor, and I'll come back to this in a minute. We just don't know how we're going to open the economy back up yet, but these forecasts tend to be very nasty. And then the unemployment rate that comes along with that, you can see, are also very nasty, where I just want to give you the middle forecast is here, which matches the median on the first panel of data, but then they're flipped because the highest level of unemployment rates are congruent more with the lowest or nastiest forecast for GDP. But you can see that they're thinking these, the more ugly scenarios are in the 20-ish range for US unemployment, which means for places like California, probably a little bit higher than 20 if the worst case scenario plays out. The lowest ones don't seem to have a lot of credence given unemployment insurance claims. It's kind of funny that they kept it there. The median's probably a little low. We will see if we don't end up in sort of the high teens in California and in the US come the April data. Okay, so a lot of municipalities are thinking about reopening. So just want to say, here's the cost that we're looking at and what sort of the calculus every state in the United States is looking at. Short-term risk of reinfection and cost to society. Shut down again. If we reinfect in such a way that governors and the president become nervous about a continued spread and sort of a redo of what we tried to avoid, we're going to go into shelter in place again, which is going to just get another hammer blow to the economy. And in the long term, we're going to see a change in the cost of business. So one way or the other, folks, how we evolve out of this, we should expect the cost of doing business to go up because we're going to have to transform our workplaces one way or the other to deal with either prevention or containing the spread for the disease, either sticking around or coming back. The potential benefits of reopening, and this is what a lot of municipalities are concerned with right now, is that we want to get spending and jobs going again and get the tax revenue flowing. That's key. The next is actually not getting the virus to repeat, or we're kind of betting on that, or doing things in a way where the benefits are going to be potentially getting back toward baseline forecasts and sort of getting our economy restarted and adapting and innovating. And that's really where the long-term kicks in. How we handle how we come out of shelter in place and potentially engage cost to generate return on investment and think about what we do to our workplaces as an investment and not just cost. That's key to gaining access to the long-term benefits and potentially seeing some entrepreneurship around this issue. So each one of these, since the first one, I've talked about economic development and what we need to do. So this is the third part where I want to focus a little bit on construction and housing. One of the biggest pieces of concern coming out of shelter in place is how is construction going to restart for places that did not have as much construction activity? And what is going to be developers' calculus in terms of will they continue projects that are permitted or go back toward planning and say, I now want to continue to go forward with the plans and build these either apartments, single-family homes, or commercial spaces. The economic impacts are extremely strong here in terms of connecting back to other parts of the economy. So if construction gets a good start coming out of the gate across the country and in places like California, that's going to help recovery a lot. And that's going to get us, in a sense, back on the good foot. But part of getting back on the good foot is going to be how we partner as a municipality with construction businesses and with these projects. So we want to make sure that the permit pipeline is smooth, that the cost to doing business is, in a sense, at least expected, if not lowered, in terms of getting construction projects going again. And for heavy and government subsidized, if you will, construction, we should expect those projects to continue to go and even Congress to expand what it's doing on the construction side to try to generate more jobs. And that's really where municipalities can help. Think again from the developer standpoint. If you want construction to continue to burgeon in your economy because it was doing really well 2017, 18, and 19, the coming out party in 2020 and 2021 is going to depend a lot on how developers see the total cost of moving forward. So it's critical that our municipalities see that as an opportunity, though recognizing general plans still need to be, in a sense, conformed to. Okay, what are we trying to avoid? And this is key thinking also about economic development. We don't want a loss of capacity. We know we're going to get job loss, but will those job losses lead to business losses and the loss of our ability to provide goods and services? That is critical for the economy overall. And then if we lose a lot of businesses, we will see a second round of contractions because we will see that the indirect, in a sense, broader connections in the economy to businesses are going to lose their revenue and they're going to stumble because their customers have gone away, not only because job losses have reduced demand, but now the reduction of businesses have reduced commercial demand. So by preserving businesses, and this is key, policy right now is really focused not so much on 100% job loss prevention or reduction, but the mix of business loss prevention and reduction with job loss, because the two together are extremely evil on economies, historically speaking. And this is where you start to get depressed versus recession in terms of economies. Now, this is the first reaction. We've already seen this. We have to watch this, and this is where the PPP lending kicks in and all the other sort of small business focus of policy. And we don't want to lose capacity on both sides of the market. That's critical. So in the uglier forecasts, those forecasts are predicated upon the idea that we will have a more ugly outcome in terms of the loss of capacity. And losing capacity means it takes you a longer time to reinvest and build back up the economy as best you can. Now, just this morning, I got a report from the New York Fed, and I get like 15, 20 feeds a day from all over the place, but something very, very intriguing came through today where they've already mapped out for the United States where these paycheck protection plan loans, and I keep screwing up the P, I sometimes call it payroll, sometimes call it paycheck. I'm now more consistent. Paycheck protection plan lending out of SBA. Check this out. This map suggests where in the first tranche, the original $349 billion that Congress passed that moved through SBA, where it all got spent initially. So you can see what percentage of small businesses received loans by state. You can see that the Midwest, kind of going from Mississippi toward Montana on a northwest trajectory, got most of the loans out of the gate. Wisconsin also got a little bit. The Northeast got a little bit. But notice New York, Florida, Texas, California all lagged behind. Now, you may say, well, okay, so is that political? Well, with Texas in the middle, from the Trump White House perspective, they probably wanted to move that money toward Texas. And you can see that Texas is a darker color, which means more loans got there than California or New York. But at the end of the day, what the economist at the New York Fed who generated this graph suggested is that the connection is the presence of community banks. So this is a time to really applaud our community banks for being SBA lenders for our local communities. And in the Midwest, there's just a larger proportion of banks that are community banks versus the coastlines. So with that, at least we're seeing the evolution. Now, California and other parts of the United States are seeing more of the PPP lending, but it has lagged, and that has made more consternation and could lead to more business losses because the money did not show up as quick on the coastlines. We will watch very closely and see if that plays out. So to wrap up, folks, we're still watching jobs. So we're now at over 30 million people that have applied for unemployment insurance that were not on the roll before across the US. California, as an example, over the last 6 weeks has seen 3.8 million people apply for unemployment insurance. The continued claims are critical, as well as the average hours worked. The average hours and continued claims are now going to become the focus of economists, because we feel like that the new initial claims for unemployment have probably peaked, and we will see how it plays. We're still dealing with cases, so the epidemiology is still a focus in terms of depth and duration. Those forecasts I showed you are very much a function of where we're going with the cases and then lifting the shelter in place. If we reinfect, we're going to go through another round of this, almost guaranteed, depending on the level of reinfection. And will we see that repeat? And furthermore, if we start to turn the corner and we do it well, activity will lift, and we will have, in a sense, a modified V or something maybe slightly closer to a U-shaped recovery. We're hoping for a modified V, meaning that we go down hard, but then bounce back pretty quickly, but not super quickly, as the White House has kind of waved its hands around. Given how long we've been in shelter in place, specifically for the more populated states, it is unlikely we will see a quick bounce back, but we might see one that's relatively quick, in the sense that by 2021, we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. So with that, that's all I have for this update. Vicki, I will take questions.
Okay, thank you, Rob.
Thank you.
So the first question is regarding the extra $600 a week of UI benefit. Is this not counterproductive to getting people back to work? Many of the low-wage workers are telling their employers that they're making more money on UI, so don't reopen soon.
Absolutely. And so one of the nasty frictions about trying to help as a government is you may help in such a way that it's almost too much in terms of preserving the incentives to go back to work. And this is a classic friction between labor economics and public economics, that if you give a lot of public assistance and really more on the social assistance side, do you undermine the incentives of people to take work offers and go back to work, versus sort of waiting to see what happens, in a sense being subsidized to wait? That can hurt businesses getting back together, either A, because they can't find workers because the labor pool is not responding to original offers, or it forces wages to go up, which can, in a sense, exacerbate the already rising cost of business. So it is something to watch, especially in lower wage areas across the United States, because this is a general policy. It is not state specific per se. The $600 is going everywhere. So for higher wage areas, it's probably a lower effect. On lower wage areas, it might be a big one.
Yeah. We did not mention this earlier, but please use the chat feature if you have any questions that you want to pose to Dr. Eiler. Let's see. Does the unemployment numbers include sole proprietors or business owners? And how much of the unemployment numbers attribute to first-time business owners getting unemployment?
That's an outstanding question. So one of the things that has been a good part of this round of unemployment insurance augmentation of benefits is that small self-employed workers can actually apply for unemployment this time, as well as so-called gig workers. So we will see how much of that actually plays out given that we're probably going to pressure a lot of our unemployment insurance systems already. And if those folks have not paid in to that system and a lot of people ask for benefits, then the federal government's going to have to come into states and actually subsidize some of that. In California, it sounds like we're getting close to that outcome as an example. But the unemployment numbers do not include those folks because those folks are not tracked the same way as, let's say, payroll workers are, because they're not necessarily on payrolls. However, if you're self-employed as a corporate entity and you submit W-2s and you shut your business down, you will, based on the way the payroll surveys work, not be counted, and those are counted. So it's a real mixed bag of how we count our self-employed and, in a sense, sole proprietor businesses.
So on that, when or how does any national data show these business losses?
The business losses usually lag a couple of years, but you'll see it in the loss of GDP. Small businesses are a large part of the total businesses and a relatively small minority, like 25%-ish of what happens with GDP. So the GDP numbers will have it there. It won't be explicit what part of it is small business. There's about a 2-year lag short of actually getting into your local area and looking at business licenses and seeing the change there as to the evolution of how the loss of small business will affect the economy on its own. We do not measure, as economists, the small business portion extremely well. We actually kind of stink at it.
Okay. All right. So several small businesses who have already received the payroll protection plan loans are now expressing that they're unlikely to be able to bring back the full workforce due to social distancing, operations like restaurants. As a result, their loans are not likely to be forgivable and will become debt. Could your take on these implications of this situation?
Well, that's a great question. And the hope is that if those businesses decide that they are not going to stay in business, then they should give the loan back as they fold up their business or as they know that they're going to reduce their workforce. Unless they can handle the debt, and that's the key, is that you're going to have this real mixed bag of businesses that were able to conform to the parameters of the loan in such a way to turn it into a grant, others that might just barely miss it, and then others who will explicitly miss it. And so one of the things that's been very tricky about this PPP lending is you need to talk to your lender and make sure that you understand completely what the parameters of the loan are to turn it into a grant versus turn it into debt. But if you're not going to hold on to your business in its current form, the best thing probably to do is give the loan back so you're not strapped with the debt, and then try to figure out another way of moving forward. And that's a very tricky situation, because when the PPP lending came out, it seemed very easy to say, wow, I should grab onto this because if I can just hold on tight and use this money to do it, it's not going to cost me anything to do it. But just make sure you talk to your lender and you know exactly what the story is, because if one person leaves, what does that do to you? Talk to your lender and make sure you know the explicit part of your loan, because it can be a little bit different one place to the other. It's not meant to be, but just watch for that very closely. The hope is that businesses are able to stay in business. If not, then you need to think very deeply about whether or not you should continue to have that loan as part of your overall debt portfolio or not.
Okay. On the unemployment situation, has the potential to dramatically impact the ag economies, especially with the harvest coming up. Any thought if the representatives are going to be acknowledging this, responding to it?
Yeah, it'll be very intriguing to watch and see how ag labor in this next harvest season plays out, because you could see it from two different angles. One is that it's going to be very tough to find workers because they're generally low wage, and if unemployment is being paid, does that, in a sense, suppress the availability of that workforce? The second part is that if we have a lot of undocumented workers who do not have access to those benefits, will we see those folks shift the labor market in which they're participating because the jobs in which they were in before are not available, and they suddenly become available for labor, specifically in places like California. But in general, ag is going to be challenged because it is a relatively low wage industry to find workers probably for the next couple of harvest seasons, as well as having other competing aspects. Like, for example, if cannabis becomes nationalized in the next 24 months, that's going to be another national shift in ag labor across the country. So we're watching very closely what goes on with ag, but the biggest threat probably on the front end is low wages versus what the unemployment benefits are and the other packages coming directly to residents that might suppress the incentives to go back to work during harvest.
Okay. Some businesses making construction improvements have asked, how will this affect any short-term construction costs?
Well, we should expect the cost of doing construction to go up one way or the other. So my take is that all businesses face that same situation where you're going to see it rise. So construction should be thinking the exact same thing, unfortunately.
Okay. Regarding one of your earlier slides, the job loss versus GDP was much more dramatic. Is this because of automation or because more retail or service jobs were lost versus manufacturing?
The latter. So
Okay.
you should expect there'll be more services jobs, which tend to be lower wage and lower income generating, or what we call value add jobs, which means that the drop in GDP is while dramatic, maybe less dramatic than the increase in unemployment rates. So, and there's an idea in economics called Okun's law that actually connects those two to each other. But when there's high volatility, that kind of the connection kind of goes out the window. Generally speaking, every 2% change in GDP is a 1% change in unemployment. This time, it's probably going to be a lot more tricky in how that connection is going to stick around. But some of those forecasts you saw were kind of using Okun's law as a way of looking forward if you think you had a pretty good handle on GDP changes.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, Vicki, we're at time.
Okay. All right. I think that there were a couple other questions, comments that I think have been covered in previous presentations. So I think we are good. I appreciate everybody's time. And Dr. Eiler, I appreciate your knowledge.
Thank you. And folks, if you do have a question that you want to ask, my contact info is in the bottom left-hand corner of this slide. That should still be in your vision. Please check that out and give me an email if you got a question that you want answered. Thanks, Vicki.
All right. Thank you.